Have you ever underestimated someone just because of their quiet demeanor? But what if the person everyone always ignores is hiding a secret that could change everything in just a few seconds? Jake was the typical school bully. Strong, confident, and accustomed to seeing fear in the eyes of others. To him, Lily was just another target, a quiet girl, easy to dominate, who would never fight back. But Jake couldn't even imagine how wrong he was, because Lily was nothing like anyone else, and in just 10 seconds, Jake would deeply regret daring to mess with her. The story begins at a high school in suburban America, where the hallways are always filled with laughter and chatter, but beneath the surface, a subtle darkness lingers: prejudice and unspoken discrimination. In this very place, the quiet footsteps of a black girl named Alicia Carter echo every day, small, lost, and lonely amidst the crowd. Alicia was a girl with long, naturally curly black hair, often hanging loosely to her sides to cover the gaze of others. Her deep brown eyes always looked down, as if she wanted to avoid the curious, scrutinizing, and sometimes contemptuous stares from those around her. She walked slowly and softly, almost as if she were deliberately trying to become an invisible shadow, avoiding attention. But the quieter she became, the more those eyes seemed to focus on her, not with sympathy or empathy, but with curiosity, malice, and sometimes disdain. Among the prying eyes, the most noticeable belonged to Jake Mitchell, a white boy of great influence, infamous as the king of the underground world of bullies. With his tall stature, haughty gaze, and a permanent sneer on his face, Jake was like a predator, always on the lookout for those he deemed weaker than him to exert his power over. From the moment Alicia walked into the school, Jake had his eye on this strange girl, a girl who was always silent, always appearing vulnerable, and seemingly never resisting any of the malicious pranks or taunts. Jake quickly concluded that Alicia would be the perfect prey for his bullying and amusement. But Jake, like everyone else, made a critical mistake by judging Alicia solely based on her quiet demeanor and skin color. They had no idea that behind that fragile exterior lay a huge secret, a hidden strength, a storm lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken and sweep everything away. Soon enough, Jake and the entire school would realize the high cost of underestimating and misjudging someone simply because of their silence and seemingly harmless appearance. But for now, it was still a secret, and Alicia continued to walk quietly through the halls, as if she didn't care about the world around her. As Alicia continued to walk quietly through the crowded hallway, whether by accident or design, hiding herself from the curious gazes of others, another pair of eyes, sharper, colder, silently followed every step she took from a distance. Those eyes belonged to Jake Mitchell, the tall, muscular white boy who exuded an aura of arrogance and confidence so overwhelming it seemed to challenge the world itself. Jake was already far too accustomed to receiving the attention of others. As the captain of the school's football team, he was hailed on the field every weekend, with cheers and applause echoing whenever he scored. But for Jake, that wasn't enough. He always craved a more intangible, quieter form of power, the kind that came from the fear and submission of others. And to attain that feeling of power, he always chose an easy target: those who were weaker, shy, and would never dare stand up for themselves. Alicia, with her quiet demeanor and submissive appearance, seemed like the perfect choice for Jake to satisfy his need for domination. Every time he saw her walking through the hallway, he felt a strange satisfaction. He enjoyed watching her lower her head, avoiding the gaze of others. He liked how she silently endured each time someone accidentally bumped into her. In Jake's eyes, Alicia was like a small prey, silently stepping into a trap that he had set for her. It started with small actions, seemingly accidental. Jake deliberately walked too close to Alicia whenever he passed her, just enough for his shoulder to bump into hers, causing the books in her arms to spill onto the floor. He would smile, offer a fake apology with a mocking glance, and then continue walking as though nothing had happened. He reveled in those brief moments when he felt in complete control of someone else's emotions. But Alicia's silence, instead of boring Jake, only fueled the fire within him. He felt provoked by her indifference. The more she didn't react, the more he wanted to find a way to break through the facade of strength he thought was fake. For him, seeing Alicia cry, or at the very least catching a glimpse of fear in her brown eyes, would be the real victory. Jake had never thought deeply about why he needed to bully others to feel stronger, but deep down, he vaguely understood that what he feared the most was the feeling of being nothing, without people weaker than him to dominate. He lived with that fear every day, and to avoid confronting it, he sought victims, people he could easily bring down, overpower, as a way to convince himself that he was truly valuable, truly strong. And now, as Jake watched Alicia standing by her locker, gently placing each book inside, he saw a new opportunity, one perfect to prove his power once again. He moved closer, a cold, sharp smile spreading across his handsome but distant face. What he didn't know was that this time he had stepped into a much more dangerous game. A game where, for the first time in his life, Jake Mitchell would not be the one in control. And soon enough, that arrogant predator would realize that the prey he had chosen was not the ordinary one he had always thought it to be. It was Alicia's steadfast and seemingly endless silence that increasingly stirred Jake to find every possible way to break it. In his mind, that silence equaled weakness, a silent invitation for predators like him. To Jake, each victim he chose had to clearly show vulnerability, submission, or at least exhibit a noticeable reaction. But Alicia was completely different. She didn't respond to any of his actions, nor did she show even the slightest emotion on her calm face. This didn't discourage Jake. On the contrary, it made him feel as though he were being challenged by an extraordinary resilience he had never encountered before. At first, everything seemed small and insignificant, almost accidental and harmless. Jake deliberately walked very close to Alicia whenever he passed her in the hallway, using his large shoulder to bump into her hard enough to make the books in her hands fall to the floor. The sounds were harsh and dry, the pages scattering across the ground, while Jake just smiled faintly, offering a half-hearted apology with a mocking glance, as though Alicia were the one who caused the collision. Alicia didn't say a word. She silently bent down to pick up the books, carefully putting them back together, then stood up and continued walking, as if she hadn't noticed his intentional actions. In the beginning, Jake thought she was just trying to act strong, or perhaps hadn't yet gathered the courage to face him. But the more time passed, the more he realized that Alicia truly wasn't reacting at all. No words of complaint, no angry looks, not even the smallest sign that she was hurt or concerned. Her demeanor irritated Jake, making him feel disrespected, because he always believed that his actions were powerful enough to shake anyone. But this small girl with her gentle chocolate skin was different. Not only did she remain unshaken, but she didn't seem to care at all. The discomfort in Jake slowly turned into simmering anger, like a small flame burning quietly in his heart. To Jake, Alicia was like a mystery he needed to unravel, someone whose detached mask he had to break to reveal the true emotions underneath. He began performing more frequent and bolder acts of harassment. Every time Alicia stood by her locker, Jake appeared right on cue, blocking her path, forcing her to either wait or take a longer route. He would deliberately laugh loudly, pretending not to see her presence, then mock her with words like, "Oh, sorry, Alicia. I didn't even see you here." He emphasized her name mockingly, making the other students around laugh along. To him, those sounds were like praise and encouragement, fueling his desire to keep pressing down on her. As time went on, Jake's taunts became sharper, focusing on Alicia's skin color and the differences he perceived. He pretended to accidentally make cutting remarks whenever he walked past her, just loud enough for her to hear, but enough for him to notice the approving glances from his friends. The words he chose were carefully calculated, venomous yet hard for teachers to reprimand directly. Each time Alicia stayed silent, Jake felt he was winning. However, what Jake didn't know was that behind Alicia's steadfast silence was a fierce internal battle. Each time Jake mocked her, Alicia felt a sharp pain in her heart. She wasn't silent because she was afraid, nor because she didn't know how to defend herself, but because she was restraining herself. A tremendous power, an ability she had hidden for years, was waiting to explode. Alicia knew that just a small moment of losing control would make Jake regret everything he had done. Jake, on the other hand, had no idea. His arrogance and self-assurance had clouded his judgment. All he saw was a silent Alicia, weak and unable to fight back. He saw that silence as the clearest sign of vulnerability. To him, the world was divided into two distinct types of people: the predator and the prey, the strong and the weak. Alicia, in his eyes, clearly belonged to the second group, a weakling he could easily dominate and suppress to satisfy his own inflated ego and need for power. Yet, even as Alicia endured in silence, Jake still didn't feel truly satisfied. What he really wanted to see was the weakness in Alicia's eyes, the tears falling from her always calm face. He wanted to see her break down, begging him to stop, as though that would be the only way for him to prove his power and worth. Each passing day, Alicia maintained her silent demeanor, which only made Jake more obsessed with hurting her at any cost. He told himself that sooner or later, Alicia would have to submit to him. But what he didn't know was that every cruel joke, every sarcastic remark he made only made Alicia stronger and more determined to control the true power within herself. Jake didn't realize how dangerous the game he was playing truly was. A game he wasn't in control of, and where the real power didn't lie with him. Because, contrary to what Jake believed, Alicia's silence had never been a sign of weakness. It was, in fact, the clearest indication of a storm waiting to break. One that, when it truly erupted, would leave him with no chance of escaping the consequences. But Jake had no idea that Alicia's silence didn't stem from weakness or fear, as he believed. In fact, behind her resigned appearance and the calm, almost cold expression on her face, lay a past filled with things that even in his wildest nightmares, he could never imagine. Alicia Carter was no ordinary student. She was the only daughter of Marcus Carter, an iconic African-American martial artist, renowned throughout the United States for his extraordinary martial arts skills, and his reputation as a former military trainer who had mentored special forces and world champion fighters. The name Marcus Carter had become legendary, not just for his talent, but also for his unyielding willpower and the iron discipline he instilled in everyone who passed through his rigorous training program. From a young age, Alicia was taught with strict discipline and a methodical approach. Her earliest memories weren't of gentle bedtime stories, but of grueling physical exercises, long martial arts training sessions, and her father's stern lessons on strength and the ability to control oneself in any situation. Marcus Carter once told her that true strength wasn't about defeating others, but about controlling oneself, mastering one's own power, even in the most difficult and pressured circumstances. Under her father's strict guidance, Alicia soon displayed a natural talent for martial arts. At just 8 years old, she possessed incredible reflexes, strength, and speed that surpassed her peers. But Marcus Carter also reminded his daughter that martial arts were meant for self-defense and protection of others, never to be used for harm or personal vengeance. However, an unfortunate incident occurred when Alicia was 12, a moment that haunted her every time she closed her eyes. A neighborhood boy named Evan, who attended the same school, regularly mocked and teased Alicia because of her skin color and differences. At first, Alicia endured it, remaining silent as her father had taught her. But one day, when Evan crossed the line and began making cruel remarks about her father, Alicia lost control of her anger for the first time in her life. That day, everything happened so quickly. Evan yanked Alicia's curly hair, threw her favorite book to the ground, and laughed mockingly. The anger inside Alicia erupted like a volcano that had been dormant for too long. She countered with a strike that was almost instinctual, too fast and too powerful for a 12-year-old girl. When Alicia regained her composure, Evan was lying on the ground, his wrist broken, his wide eyes filled with fear, staring at her as if she were some terrifying monster. From that day on, the way people looked at Alicia changed completely. Her once close friends became wary and distant. Teachers no longer saw her as the obedient student. Instead, they looked at her with concern and caution, even fear. Alicia had to endure prying eyes, whispers behind her back, and gossip every time she walked down the hallway. It was then that Alicia realized she had made a mistake by losing control, that she had used her strength to hurt someone, even if unintentionally. Though Marcus Carter didn't scold her, he helped her realize that the power she held wasn't just a gift, but also a great responsibility that she had to learn to control. From that moment on, Alicia promised herself never to use martial arts to solve any conflict unless there were no other options. She forced herself into a strict regimen of self-control, always restraining her emotions in every situation, even when enduring bullying or harassment. In the years that followed, Alicia lived under that strict self-discipline. She silently endured all the bullying at her new school, fearing that even a moment of losing control would hurt someone else and cause her to lose herself once again. She hid her true strength behind her quiet, seemingly weak exterior, trying to make others believe she was harmless. But the more she remained silent, the more people like Jake Mitchell saw her as the perfect target to attack. To Jake, that silence was a clear sign of weakness, but he had no idea that he was standing before a volcano that seemed dormant but was bubbling inside, waiting for the right moment to erupt. Alicia's patience, though immense, had its limits. She reminded herself every day that her silence did not mean weakness, that she was stronger than anyone trying to harm her. Jake, with his overconfidence, couldn't perceive the danger that awaited him. He still thought he was in complete control, that Alicia was just a weak girl who couldn't fight back. But he had no idea that the secret behind Alicia's quiet exterior wasn't weakness. It was an extraordinary strength. A strength that once awakened, no one, especially those who had underestimated her, could escape the fury it would bring. And Jake Mitchell, with his arrogant confidence, would soon become the first to experience the consequences of underestimating the true power of Alicia Carter. But Jake's arrogance and ignorance made him blind to the fact that even the most steadfast silence would eventually be tested by its limits. Alicia had been patient, restrained, and had always told herself to avoid conflict. She lived by a simple rule: never let anger dictate her actions again, especially after she lost control with Evan. But now her calmness was being challenged more than ever, and Jake was the one deliberately pushing her to that breaking point. That afternoon, just as the last class of the day ended, the hallway quickly filled with students. Laughter, footsteps, and chatter echoed everywhere. Alicia calmly walked to her familiar locker, gently opening it to retrieve her small journal, the one thing she always carried with her every day. The journal wasn't just where she wrote down fleeting thoughts or feelings. It was the place where she could express things she'd never dared to tell anyone, not even her father. As Alicia was about to tuck the journal into her bag, a large, rough hand suddenly appeared, snatching it from her grip. Alicia startled and turned around, facing Jake Mitchell's familiar challenging gaze and mocking smile. He raised her journal high, deliberately allowing the surrounding students to see, and mocking laughter quickly spread like ripples on water. "Oh, look what I found," Jake smirked, his voice laced with teasing mockery. The students nearby started to glance back in curiosity, a few chuckling with amusement at this familiar spectacle. Everyone knew Jake Mitchell liked to tease Alicia, but it was rare for him to do so openly, as he was doing now. Alicia took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. She slowly lifted her gaze to Jake, her voice still soft, strangely calm. "Jake, give it back to me." Alicia extended her hand towards him, hoping he was just trying to tease her and would stop. But Jake wasn't about to let this opportunity slip by. He grabbed the journal, deliberately flipping through a few pages, pretending to read with an amused, provocative expression. His eyes quickly scanned the lines of Alicia's writing, and then he burst into loud, mocking laughter. The students around him fell silent, curious to know what Alicia had written that made Jake so entertained. "Oh, how touching! Alicia keeps a journal, guys," Jake laughed, turning to his close friends and winking mockingly. "Maybe we should read a few pages to understand this mysterious girl a little better, huh?" Alicia remained still, her hand still outstretched, not shaking, not losing control. Her eyes remained fixed on Jake, and now there was a slight firmness in her voice. "Jake, I'm not joking. Give it back to me now." Jake looked up at her, still thinking she would give up like always, turn away, and silently endure the humiliation. But this time he wanted to see her truly break down, to see her show the weakness he always believed was hidden beneath her cold exterior. "If I don't give it back, what will you do, Alicia?" Jake raised an eyebrow, stepping closer, lowering his voice just enough for only Alicia to hear. "Will you cry? Or will you go running to your martial artist father?" Those words caused a surge of anger to rise inside Alicia, but she still tried to keep her voice as calm as possible. "I won't say it a third time, Jake. Give it back." Jake noticed the slight change in Alicia's tone. Her deep brown eyes now had a sharpness to them, no longer indifferent like before. But Jake didn't see this as a warning. Instead, he thought that he had finally succeeded in angering her, which only made him more pleased. "Oh, Alicia, you're so scary," Jake mocked, turning to the crowd, wearing a smug smile. Quiet laughter rippled through the hallway, only fueling his excitement. He stepped back, raised the journal higher, and challenged her with an arrogant tone. "If you want it back, come here and take it from me." The students around them began whispering, all curious to see what Alicia would do next. Jake stood there, completely convinced that Alicia wouldn't dare do anything other than turn away and walk off, just like every other time. He thought that he had finally won, that he had made her feel weak and powerless in front of everyone. But Jake was completely wrong. He didn't realize that this time Alicia wouldn't back down so easily. He had just crossed the final line, forcing Alicia to choose between the restraint she had worked so hard to maintain and standing up to protect herself. Amid the jeering of the crowd, under the challenging gaze of Jake, Alicia felt a surge of anger and determination rise within her, stronger than ever before. This time, Alicia understood that she had no choice but to step out of the shadows, to face Jake, and show him and everyone around her that her silence had never been a sign of weakness. And soon, Jake Mitchell would realize that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. It seemed that Alicia's resolute silence during their previous encounter only made Jake feel more frustrated than ever. He had expected panic, fear, or at least a few tears from this small girl, but all he received was an astonishing calmness. In Jake's mind, that was a huge insult to him. Someone who had never failed to make others bow down before his power and arrogance. He couldn't accept that. In the days that followed, Jake found himself restless and uneasy every time he saw Alicia quietly walking through the hallway. She still maintained that calm expression, as though his actions had never existed. Jake hated the invisibility Alicia created, and he hated how she made him feel as though he meant nothing in her eyes. He was determined to find a way to break through this wall of silent strength, even if it meant crossing boundaries he'd never considered before. One late afternoon, after the school bell had rung long ago, the hallway began to empty. The sunlight of the setting sun filtered through the windows, casting soft orange-yellow streaks across the lockers. Alicia stood in front of her locker, her gaze as still as ever. She opened the door, carefully placing each book inside, then quietly checked her small silver necklace, a precious gift her father had given her on her 16th birthday. Whenever she felt anxious or tired, Alicia would gently hold the small leaf-shaped pendant as a way to regain her calm and balance. She didn't notice Jake standing in the distance, silently watching her for quite some time. His gaze was cold and full of resolve, like a hunter who had decided to corner its prey. For Jake, this wasn't just about reclaiming a sense of power, it was a matter of honor. Honor for someone who was accustomed to dominating and would never accept being disrespected or underestimated by anyone. Jake moved closer to Alicia with strong, confident steps. Alicia only sensed his presence when his shadow fell clearly across the locker in front of her. She slowly turned around, facing his challenging gaze and arrogant smile. The silence in the hallway felt like it had been frozen by the tension, with only Jake's heavy breaths filling the air. "Hello, Alicia," Jake said coldly, his voice full of provocation. "It seems like you still haven't learned your lesson, huh?" Alicia didn't respond immediately, just looking at Jake with a calm but cautious expression. She knew that this time Jake wasn't going to stop at petty teasing. "What do you want, Jake?" she asked softly, trying to keep her voice as steady as possible. Jake smirked, his eyes briefly flashing with anger at her cold demeanor. He took another step forward, shortening the distance between them, then looked straight into Alicia's eyes, lowering his voice threateningly. "I just want you to understand one thing. In this school, no one can disrespect me, especially not you." Just as Alicia was about to respond, Jake suddenly reached out and grabbed the silver necklace she was wearing around her neck. His movement was too fast and forceful for her to react in time. A second later, Alicia clearly heard the sharp, dry sound in the quiet hallway. The small necklace had been yanked off, landing in Jake's hand. The silver leaf pendant lay nestled in his palm, glinting in the fading sunlight. In that moment, Alicia felt as though time had stopped, and the world around her became unnervingly silent. Her eyes locked on the only gift her father had ever given her, a precious item now in the hands of the person who had always tried to hurt her. For the first time in many years, Alicia felt anger rise in her chest, a fierce emotion she had struggled to control for so long. Jake saw the change in Alicia's eyes. He sensed something dangerous slowly awakening inside this small girl. But instead of recognizing the warning signs, Jake took it as a sign that he had succeeded. He believed he had finally pushed Alicia to the breaking point, and this made him feel even more satisfied. "Oh, so you're angry now, Alicia?" Jake smiled mockingly, his hand still gripping the necklace. "What's next? Are you going to cry or beg me to give it back?" Jake's words were like sharp blades, deliberately aimed to pierce through Alicia's last bit of pride and restraint. But what he didn't realize was that with every word he spoke, Alicia's silence was no longer a sign of weakness. It was becoming the preparation for a reaction he never expected. Alicia took a deep breath, trying to control the anger building up inside her. She slowly raised her head, and the usual calm in her eyes was completely gone, replaced by a cold, determined gaze that Jake had never seen before. "Jake," Alicia said in a low, steady voice, but with undeniable power, "I'm only going to warn you one last time. Give me the necklace now or you will regret it." Jake heard those words, but he still dismissed them. He smirked wider, thinking that this was just an empty threat from a girl he had always considered weak. But Jake was completely wrong. The audacious challenge of that day was the final turning point, the event that pushed Alicia past the limits of patience she had always kept in check. It marked the beginning of the awakening of a strength that Jake could never have imagined. He didn't know that, in just a few minutes, it would be him facing the greatest fear and regret of his life. The moment the silver necklace snapped from Alicia's neck and settled firmly in Jake's hand, a sharp, dry sound echoed through the unnerving silence of the hallway. Alicia stood motionless, time seemingly stopping in that instant. All the emotions, all the memories she had suppressed for years, now concentrated into a single point: her eyes. For the first time since Jake began his bullying, Alicia raised her eyes and looked directly at him with an entirely different gaze. No longer was there resignation, nor was there any sign of hurt or despair. Her gentle brown eyes, once soft, now seemed to transform into two sharp blades, an icy coldness radiating from them that sent a chill through the students nearby. They instinctively stopped breathing, paused their conversations, and turned to witness the shift in the air. No one dared to speak, as they all felt the rising tension, stronger and more overwhelming than ever. Jake felt the shift in Alicia. For a brief moment, an uneasy and strange sense of discomfort and insecurity rose within him, something he had never faced before. But his arrogant instincts and pride quickly dismissed the warning signs. Instead, Jake forced a smirk, adopting a defiant posture, trying to appear unaffected by the sudden change in Alicia's demeanor. "So, what now, Alicia?" Jake spoke, his voice attempting to sound confident, but betraying a faint tremor that was almost unnoticeable. "Finally decided to speak up? Go ahead, or are you planning to just keep staring at me?" Alicia didn't answer immediately. She kept her cold gaze fixed on him, not once blinking, focusing intently on Jake's eyes, which were now beginning to waver. In her eyes, there was no longer the image of a shy, silent girl. Instead, there was the sternness and conviction of someone who had endured and overcome severe trials in life. A different Alicia had awakened, an Alicia Jake had no idea about. "Jake, you're making a huge mistake," Alicia finally spoke, her voice soft but cold enough to send shivers down the spines of those around her. "I think you should give me back that necklace right now." The students witnessing the confrontation fell silent, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and tension. The air in the hallway thickened with every word Alicia spoke. A few students took a step back, feeling uneasy, but their gaze remained fixed on the two figures at the center. They had never heard Alicia speak with such seriousness and determination, and that made them feel like something big was about to unfold. Jake, though anxiety had begun to creep into his chest, tried to remain tough. He couldn't lose face in front of the crowd, especially not in front of Alicia. the girl he always thought was weaker than him in every way. He shrugged provocatively, twirling the silver necklace around his fingers, deliberately showing no fear of Alicia's cold demeanor. Mistake? Alicia? I think the one making a mistake here is you. Do you think you can threaten me? What are you going to do next? Hit me? Jake's words rang out like a bold challenge. Alicia still didn't break her gaze, and it was in that moment that Jake finally felt the full weight of the silent strength he had always dismissed. It wasn't that Alicia didn't know how to speak, nor that she didn't know how to react. She just chose, with control, when to speak up. The silence stretched on for a few more seconds, each passing second pressing down on Jake, making him feel more and more uneasy. For the first time, he felt uncomfortable facing someone as completely silent as Alicia. Someone who wasn't scared, wasn't trembling, and wasn't showing weakness the way he had expected. Finally, Alicia took a step forward, closing the gap between them. She looked directly into his eyes, and with a calm but resolute voice, she declared, "Jake, I'll say this one last time. Give me back that necklace now, or you will have to take responsibility for what happens next." Her voice, full of power and eerie calm, made Jake instinctively take half a step back. He had never witnessed such an attitude from Alicia before, and his instincts were signaling that he had crossed a line he shouldn't have. But he couldn't back down in front of everyone. He gripped the necklace tightly, took a deep breath, and let out another mocking laugh. "So what now, Alicia? What are you going to do next? Show me," he taunted. That challenge was the last straw. Alicia realized she had no other choice. Her eyes once again locked onto Jake's, and in that gaze was a final warning, clear and powerful, stronger than any words she had used before. All the students witnessing the confrontation could feel the palpable change in the air, as if they were standing on the edge of a storm that was about to break. And Jake, who had continuously provoked and underestimated Alicia, now stood at the threshold of a decision that would determine his fate. He had no idea that in just a few minutes he would be the one forced to face the fear and regret of a lifetime, because Alicia's sharp, cold, determined gaze was the clearest sign that this time Alicia would not remain silent anymore. The moment Alicia's sharp gaze met Jake's provocatively mocking eyes, a brief but intensely tense silence enveloped the hallway. Before Jake could fully comprehend what was about to happen, before he could even retract the arrogant smile on his face, a cold wave of unease began to crawl down his spine. It came so quickly and clearly that his instincts screamed at him that he had made an irreparable mistake. But before he could react, before he could taunt her again, Alicia acted. The silence of the hallway was suddenly shattered by Alicia's lightning-fast movement. To the shock and surprise of everyone watching, Alicia charged straight at Jake, her movements decisive and precise beyond belief. Jake, with his large physique and his pride in his physical strength, was caught completely off guard by the speed and technique that far surpassed anything he had ever imagined from this girl he always thought was weak. In an instant, Alicia had closed the distance between them, and one of her hands locked onto the wrist that held the necklace with terrifying strength. Jake frantically tried to pull his arm away, but immediately realized he couldn't break free from her firm and unyielding grip. Confusion flashed in his eyes, then quickly turned to panic as he felt, more clearly than ever before, the true strength that Alicia possessed. Less than a second later, Alicia used Jake's own arm to pivot, redirecting the force of his attack and effortlessly knocking him off balance as though he were nothing more than a rag doll. Jake stumbled, and before he could regain his footing, he felt Alicia's foot sweep low to the ground, sending him crashing to the floor with a perfect leg sweep. His massive body lost its center of gravity, slamming to the ground with a loud thud, echoing through the hallway like a final declaration of power changing hands. Jake lay on his back, eyes wide with shock, his body unmoving from the blow and the sudden sharp pain now shooting through his back. All the students who witnessed the scene stood frozen, mouths agape in disbelief, some even forgetting to breathe. The hallway, which had once been quiet, was now completely still, filled only with Jake's desperate, panicked breaths as he lay on the floor. For the first time in his life, Jake felt completely powerless. The sense of power, the dominance over others that he had always chased, evaporated far too easily and quickly in just under 10 seconds. Alicia stood still before him, her cold eyes never once wavering. Her hand slowly opened to catch the silver necklace as it fell from Jake's hand. Her motion was gentle yet powerful, no rush, no agitation. She moved as though she had done this hundreds of times before, as if subduing Jake required no effort at all. From his position on the floor, Jake looked up at Alicia, desperately trying to hide the fear and confusion in his eyes. But the truth was, he was terrified. He couldn't believe what had just happened, couldn't accept that he had been defeated so easily and quickly, especially by Alicia, the one he had always belittled and mocked. He struggled to rise, but the pain in his back made him grit his teeth, his trembling hand placed on the cold floor. The humiliation, anger, and helplessness mixed within him, making him more panicked and out of control than he had ever been. Never before had he felt so weak and vulnerable in front of so many people. The students around him seemed unable to believe what had just unfolded before their eyes. They all stood silent, no one daring to speak, quietly staring at Alicia with a mixture of surprise and awe. Alicia, the girl they had seen just moments ago as weak and isolated, now stood before them with an entirely different image. A strong, decisive, powerful Alicia, terrifying in her calmness. A few students began to whisper among themselves, the hushed conversations quickly spreading across the hallway. Some expressed admiration for Alicia, but most felt a sense of fear as they realized they had never truly understood this strange girl. Jake, once the ruler of the school, now lay there, the clear image of weakness and defeat. Alicia slowly approached Jake, her gaze still cold but fearfully calm. She bent down to look at him, her voice soft but stern as she said, "I warned you, Jake. Never underestimate someone just because they choose to remain silent." Alicia's words, though quiet, were like sharp blades, carving into Jake's pride, which had already been shattered. He had nothing left to counter or resist. He could only lie there motionless, his eyes filled with the unmistakable look of defeat. In that moment, Jake understood that he had lost everything, his honor, his power, the arrogance he had always been proud of. In just 10 short seconds, everything he had believed in had collapsed, and he knew that, from that day on, he could never again look at Alicia, or anyone else, the way he once had. Just 10 seconds, 10 fateful seconds, had forever changed Jake Mitchell's destiny. The once feared bully of the school, now a clear symbol of failure and helplessness. The moment Alicia leaned close to Jake and whispered in a voice both soft and powerful, "I told you to stop." The hallway seemed to fall into an oppressive silence. Her simple words pierced through Jake's defenses, shattering the hardened arrogance he had carefully built over the years. In that instant, Jake understood more clearly than ever the feeling of being completely defeated. A defeat not only physical, but also one of pride and honor. Never in his life had Jake felt such humiliation. He lay motionless on the cold floor, his eyes wide but empty, as if he still couldn't accept the truth of what had just happened. His heart pounded so fiercely it felt as though it might burst from his chest, each beat ringing in his ears as a bitter reminder that he had lost to someone he had once considered beneath him. The students surrounding them, who had long seen Jake as a symbol of strength and power, now watched in disbelief as he lay utterly powerless before Alicia, a girl who had always been silent, never even given a second glance. Their gazes shifted from astonishment to confusion, then to disappointment and even pity for Jake. Whispers began to spread like a breeze through the cracks of a door, soft but unmistakable. And Jake could clearly hear that he had completely lost his position in the eyes of everyone around him. Trying to regain his composure, Jake gritted his teeth through the pain, gathering all his strength into his trembling hands as he tried to push himself up. But as soon as he attempted to lift himself, a sharp pain shot through his back, causing him to groan and fall back to the floor. The sense of helplessness and shame surged within him, making his face burn with embarrassment. Alicia remained standing silently before him, her eyes never leaving Jake's suffering face. But in those eyes there was no pity, no mockery, no satisfaction. What Alicia displayed was a calmness so terrifying, an unshakable composure that spoke of someone who fully understood their own strength and felt no need to prove anything further. She simply stood there, watching Jake with a calm, unyielding expression, causing him to feel even more uneasy and fearful. Jake realized that to escape this humiliating situation he had no choice but to accept the truth. He had lost. His proud ego had to face the brutal reality that he wasn't as strong as he thought. And Alicia, the one he had always belittled, was the strongest and most terrifying person he had ever faced. Finally, in a moment full of bitterness and helplessness, Jake took a deep breath, lowered his head to avoid the gazes of those around him, and whispered in a voice so quiet it was almost inaudible, "Sorry, Alicia, please, spare me." The moment those words escaped Jake's lips, the hallway fell completely silent. Everyone present stared at each other in shock, unable to believe that Jake Mitchell, the one who had made the whole school fear him, could utter such words in front of everyone. Jake lowered his head even further, trying to hide the overwhelming shame building inside him. The humiliation and fear made him want to disappear right then and there, but he had no choice but to remain lying there, waiting for Alicia's judgment. Alicia, after a brief moment of silence, slowly knelt beside Jake. She didn't say anything else, but gently placed her hand on his shoulder, as though to convey a clear message. She wasn't weak, but she wasn't one to seek revenge or humiliate others either. She was simply strong enough to protect herself, and compassionate enough to give Jake a chance to realize his mistakes. "Jake," Alicia spoke softly, but with a clear finality, "you don't need to apologize to me. You just need to understand this. No one has the right to hurt others just because they think they're stronger. I hope you remember this lesson." Her words rang out clearly and powerfully, not only making Jake but also the students around them reflect deeply. Jake stayed silent for a long while, then slowly nodded, reluctantly. Inside, he felt a bitter regret, a sense of complete failure, but also an honest acknowledgement that he had been wrong. No one dared to speak another word. The students who had witnessed the event stepped back, leaving a large gap around Jake and Alicia. They understood that this was not just a lesson for Jake, but a profound lesson for everyone. In that moment, Jake knew his life had been completely changed. He would no longer be seen as strong or frightening in anyone's eyes. From now on, he would have to learn to live with the truth that strength didn't come from overpowering others, but from respect, humility, and self-control. Alicia stood up, looking around the hallway. This time, the looks directed at her were not those of disdain or mockery, but of respect and admiration. Alicia nodded gently, then walked away, leaving Jake lying on the floor, for the first time in his life fully understanding what failure felt like and what true humiliation was. The humiliation of someone who had underestimated the hidden strength in another's silence. As Alicia turned to walk away, leaving Jake still lying motionless on the hallway floor, the silence was suddenly shattered by a voice full of astonishment mixed with excitement. It was Ryan Evans, a well-known member of the school's wrestling team, who had always kept a safe distance from Jake but was popular enough to be recognized by many students at school. "Wait a second. She's the daughter of Marcus Carter, right? The legendary martial artist who trained U.S. Special Forces and many world martial arts champions," Ryan exclaimed, his voice clearly ringing throughout the quiet space, drawing the attention of everyone present in the hallway. Immediately, all eyes turned to Ryan. His words were like a bomb exploding in the already tense atmosphere. Students began whispering among themselves, their voices growing louder as they gossiped. They looked at Alicia with a completely different expression, one filled with surprise, admiration, and even respect. Alicia, who had always been seen as a quiet, weak girl, was now revealed to carry the blood and strength of a legend. Jake, though still lying motionless on the floor, could hear every word Ryan said. His face shifted instantly from pain to bewilderment and extreme fear. He had never imagined that the girl he had always looked down on, the one he had bullied, was the daughter of such a famous and fearsome figure. Someone who had appeared in the media, considered one of the most powerful and respected martial artists in the U.S. Are you serious?" a student near Ryan asked, his voice trembling with astonishment and hesitation. Ryan nodded seriously, his expression firm and resolute. He continued, making sure everyone could hear clearly. "I know this for a fact. My father trained under Marcus Carter. He's a real legend, not only known for his top-notch martial arts skills, but also for his strict discipline and the life lessons he passed down to his students. Alicia is his daughter. Trained from a young age, she's definitely learned all the techniques her father taught." His words rang out strong and clear, making the atmosphere in the hallway even more charged than before. The students around them now looked at Alicia with a whole new perspective, admiration mixed with respect and even fear. To them, Alicia was no longer just an ordinary girl. She had become someone with a thrilling and awe-inspiring backstory. Alicia, still standing quietly not far away, slowly turned back. Her eyes briefly showed surprise as she looked at Ryan, but then she quickly regained her familiar calm demeanor. She hadn't wanted this secret to be revealed like this, but now everything was beyond her control. All she could do was sigh lightly and nod, acknowledging that Ryan's words were indeed true. Jake, now trying to sit up, had a pale face from the shock and embarrassment, but also from the bitter realization of the huge mistake he had just made. He realized that he wasn't just facing a normal Alicia, but someone who was the heir to a family that even the elite forces respected. His ignorance and excessive pride had led him to this humiliating situation. The whispers around them grew louder, more distinct. Some students quickly pulled out their phones to search for information about Marcus Carter and the incredible achievements he had accomplished. In no time, the hallway was filled with astonished exclamations when they discovered that Alicia's father was indeed a legendary figure in both martial arts and the U.S. military. "Oh my God, I can't believe it. She's the daughter of a legend. How did we never know this until now?" The comments kept coming, each one like a dagger to Jake's already shattered self-esteem. He lowered his head, unable to look at Alicia or anyone else. All that remained in his mind was regret and endless bitterness. Ryan, after revealing this information, looked at Alicia with a respectful expression. "I'm sorry, Alicia. I know you probably didn't want anyone to know this, but I think everyone should understand more about you and what you've been through. No one deserves to be looked down upon, especially not someone like you." Alicia smiled gently and responded calmly. "Thank you, Ryan. I understand your good intentions. But the truth is, I've never wanted to use my father's fame to make others respect or fear me. I just want everyone to understand that true strength lies in how we treat each other, not in being stronger or more famous than anyone else." Alicia's words once again brought the hallway into a deep silence, full of reflection. The students around her looked at her not only with respect, but also with deep admiration for the character and integrity she displayed. As for Jake, he remained sitting silently on the cold ground, for the first time in his life truly feeling that he had completely lost, not just to Alicia, but to himself. The secret of Alicia's true identity had made Jake realize that his biggest mistake wasn't just underestimating her, but that he had always underestimated the true power that comes from humility, resilience, and respect for others. In that moment, Jake understood that nothing would ever be the same again. He had been completely defeated by his own arrogance and ignorance. And Alicia, the one he had always belittled, had become the one to teach him the most bitter lesson of his life. Jake stood motionless in the crowded hallway, but for the first time in his life, he felt completely alone. Around him, the whispers and the questioning gazes of his peers grew sharper and more apparent, as if every word was becoming an invisible arrow, piercing deep into his already wounded self-esteem. In that moment, Jake realized that what was crumbling was not just the image of power he had spent years building, but all the trust and confidence he had relied on to impose himself on others. Ryan Evans' words about Alicia and her father, Marcus Carter, still echoed in Jake's mind. Each word, like a sharp blade, was slowly peeling away the arrogant shell he had always been proud of. He vividly remembered the sense of superiority, the absolute belief that Alicia was just a weak, quiet girl, an easy target for him to assert his power and prove his worth. But now, all of that seemed foolish and shameful, like never before. Jake glanced toward Alicia, still standing not far away, her composure and calmness so unbelievable. Her eyes didn't hold any victory or gloating, just a quiet confidence. It was that calmness that made Jake feel a sharp pain in his chest, a bitter realization that it was he who was weak and pitiful in this situation. Jake had never really thought about why he always felt the need to prove he was stronger than others, always seeking submission and fear from those around him. But now, standing before this bitter truth, he realized that the real reason was that he had never felt strong enough, good enough, or important enough in his own eyes. To hide that insecurity, he had always sought out those he thought were weaker, people he believed couldn't fight back, people he could easily overpower and look down on. And Alicia, with her quiet demeanor and, especially, her different race, had become the perfect target in his eyes. Jake realized a harsh truth, that deep inside he had always harbored prejudices and misconceptions about those who were not like him. He had thought that he was stronger, smarter, and superior simply because he was born into a world that favored people like him, a world where white people like him were always seen as more powerful and more valuable than others. But now, all those prejudices shattered like a bubble before him. Alicia, the black girl he had always looked down upon, had proven beyond any doubt that true strength wasn't about appearance or skin color, but about who she was as a person, her ability to restrain herself, her resilience, and the dignity she showed, even in the toughest situations. Jake stood there, feeling like everything he had once known was collapsing around him. He knew that the looks from his friends, those who had once seen him as the king of the school, now reflected pity or even contempt. Facing this harsh truth, Jake felt his heart tighten, each breath becoming more difficult and painful. But deep inside, between the feelings of shame and humiliation, Jake began to realize something important, that he had no one else to blame but himself. He had brought himself into this situation by his own wrong choices, distorted thinking, and unwarranted arrogance. Confronting this truth was painful and bitter, but it was also the first step in learning and growing from his serious mistakes. At that moment, Alicia slowly stepped closer, looking directly at Jake. Her gaze remained calm but stern, carrying sympathy but also a final warning that she would never tolerate anyone who looked down on or harmed others. "Jake," Alicia said gently, her voice still calm but filled with clear authority, "I've never wanted to hurt anyone, but I will never let anyone look down on or harm me. I hope you understand that from today on." Jake stood there, silently staring at Alicia, for the first time truly feeling that her words had sunk deep into his heart. He couldn't respond. All he could do was slowly nod, reluctantly acknowledging that she was right, and he was the one who needed to change. Around him, the students who had once supported and admired him now looked at him with unfamiliar, cautious glances. A few quietly walked away, not wanting to witness Jake's complete downfall. Jake knew that from this day on, everything would be different. He would have to start over, learn how to accept and respect others, and confront and overcome the deep-seated prejudices within himself. Alicia gently turned and began to walk away, leaving Jake standing alone in the hallway. For the first time, he fully understood what true failure felt like. But amid the bitterness, he also understood that this might be his chance to re-examine himself, to realize that the true value of a person lies not in dominating others, but in understanding and respecting them, especially when they are different from you. Standing there, in the silence and solitude, Jake realized that he had paid a very heavy price to learn this lesson. A lesson in respect, humility, and compassion, one that Alicia had silently but powerfully taught him more profoundly than anyone else in his life. Amid the growing whispers echoing through the hallway, Jake suddenly realized that he had just lost something far more important than the power he had always sought: respect. Once a symbol of strength, fear, and admiration, he had transformed into someone pitiful, weak, and defeated in the eyes of everyone around him. The looks he had once craved as he walked through the hallways, admiring, wary, even fearful, had now completely changed. Instead, they were filled with sympathy, pity, and even mockery. Jake had once believed he could control everything around him through strength and dominance, but now he realized that power built on fear was never sustainable. It could vanish like an illusion the moment someone brave stood up to challenge it. Jake tried to glance around, hoping to find some support from his close friends, those who had always stood by him in every conflict. But now, all he saw was avoidance, indifference, and some friends even intentionally turning away as if they had never known him. It was a blow so hard that Jake felt as if the ground beneath his feet was literally collapsing, pulling everything he had ever believed in into an endless abyss. For years, Jake had proudly held the power to decide who was accepted, who was excluded, who would be respected, and who would be the target of his bullying. But today, he was the one being judged and excluded by his own small community. Everyone realized that the power he had built on bullying and belittling others was nothing more than a false, temporary power, easily shattered by the true strength of courage and self-respect, just as Alicia had demonstrated. Jake stood there, his body stiff with shame, his hands clenched into fists, not in anger, but to try to suppress the trembling caused by the overwhelming sense of humiliation rising within him. For the first time in his life, Jake truly felt what it was like to be alone and isolated, with no one standing by him. His arrogant ego and the absolute belief in his own power had been completely shattered into pieces, all in the brief moment when Alicia fought back. In the crowd, Jake could hear each whispered word, each one like a small, cold knife stabbing into his pride. Wow, I didn't know Jake was this weak. He always claimed he was the strongest in school. How embarrassing. I always knew Jake was just a bully. Today proves it. He's such a coward. The whispers grew louder, enough for Jake to understand that he had completely lost all credibility and respect in the eyes of everyone. The looks that had once admired him now shifted to ridicule and pity. Jake had never imagined that he would find himself in this situation, becoming the object of mockery, laughter, just like those he had once looked down on and bullied. He recalled all the times he had humiliated Alicia and others in front of crowds. Back then, he had never cared about their feelings or the harm he caused them. But now, as he experienced the same pain, he fully understood the bitterness of the suffering he had inflicted on others. Jake felt his breath growing heavier and more difficult. He knew deep down that there was no way to salvage the situation. In the eyes of everyone, he was now nothing but a complete failure, a pitiable person with no value to command any respect. At that moment, someone in the crowd gently stepped closer to Jake. It was Ryan Evans, the one who had revealed Alicia's secret earlier. Ryan stood before Jake, his voice serious but without mockery, only sincerity and honesty. "Jake, I think you understand why you're in this situation today. It's time for you to face the truth and take responsibility for what you've done. No one is stronger for hurting others. Only those who know how to respect and protect others are truly strong." Ryan's words weren't filled with pity, but they made Jake feel a deeper sense of shame than ever before. He couldn't respond. All he could do was lower his head in silence, listening, because he understood that Ryan was right, and that only added to his bitterness. Jake glanced around once more as if to memorize the gaze of each person. Those who once feared and obeyed him now looked at him with disappointment and contempt. In that moment, he realized that everything he had built on bullying and threatening others was nothing but a meaningless illusion. Jake slowly began to walk away, each step heavy as if he were carrying an enormous weight of shame and humiliation. No one spoke to comfort him or stop him, because everyone understood that this was the greatest and most bitter lesson Jake had to learn on his own. The authority of Jake Mitchell had completely collapsed, not because he was physically weak, but because of his weakness in spirit, in his thinking, and in the way he treated others. Now, he had only one choice: to accept this truth and change himself, or continue sinking deeper into the cycle of arrogance and failure. Jake realized that, though it was painful, this might be his last chance to truly mature and understand the true value of respect, humility, and the dignity of a person. Confronting this harsh truth, Jake knew that the journey to find himself again would be long and difficult, but he had no choice but to keep moving forward, on a path full of bitterness that he had chosen and created for himself. As Alicia silently bent down to pick up the broken silver necklace, carefully placing it into her pocket, and then walked away without turning back even once, the hallway seemed to fall into absolute silence. This stillness didn't contain mockery or sarcasm, but a profound acknowledgement of an obvious truth. Alicia wasn't just strong physically, but also possessed a mental and moral strength far beyond anything any of them could imagine. No one dared to laugh at Jake now. All the students standing there were fully aware that Alicia's simple yet meaningful action was sharper than any criticism. By silently walking away, Alicia conveyed a message clearer and stronger than 1,000 words. She never had to lower herself to win. Her victory wasn't in defeating Jake. It was in maintaining her principles and self-respect. In the heavy silence that surrounded him, Jake clearly felt every gaze upon him. But now, those gazes had completely changed. No longer were there looks of fear or admiration. Now, there was hesitation, pity mixed with mockery and disdain. For the first time in his life, Jake understood what it felt like to become completely invisible to those who had once been his allies. He stood there for a long time, watching Alicia's figure fade as she disappeared through the hallway door. That image was now etched deeply in Jake's mind, a permanent mark that he knew would never fade. It was the first time he truly felt admiration for someone else, a person he had once looked down on and underestimated more than anyone. Jake slowly turned around, beginning to walk down the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. He tried to avoid the gazes of those around him, but it was impossible to escape the hushed whispers that seemed to swirl around him. Each word was like a dagger, sinking deeper into his shattered self-esteem. But what hurt Jake the most wasn't the murmurs or the whispers, but the clear realization that he had lost what mattered most, his self-respect and belief in himself. He had once believed that power lay in making others fear him, but now he understood that this was only a false power, a cover-up for the cowardice and insecurity he had always tried to hide. Walking through the long, empty hallway, Jake began to question himself, something he had never done before. He thought about Alicia, about the strength, composure, and self-respect she had always displayed, even when he relentlessly provoked and hurt her. He thought about Marcus Carter, Alicia's legendary father, the man he had dismissed as insignificant before he learned the truth. And he wondered if he could ever become like them. Strong, not because he could dominate others, but strong because he knew how to control himself, how to treat others with sincere respect. Jake remembered the words Ryan Evans had spoken to him earlier. No one is stronger for hurting others. Only those who know how to respect and protect others are truly strong. Those words continued to repeat in his mind, each one trying to open his eyes to a truth he had long avoided. Now, Jake realized that in order to regain respect from others, he first had to start by respecting himself. That meant accepting his mistakes, facing the painful truth that he had always been wrong in looking down on others just because they were different from him. And most importantly, he had to learn how to change, to understand that true strength came from within, through humility, compassion, and the ability to understand others. Jake felt the bitterness rise as he thought about all the people he had hurt before. Alicia was just one of many who had suffered from his bullying. He wondered if they had ever felt what he was feeling now, the loneliness, the shame, the complete abandonment. It only deepened his shame and regret. He made the decision that from this moment forward, he would have to change. Though he knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, he had no other choice if he wanted to escape the trap he had created for himself. He would have to learn how to apologize to those he had hurt, starting with Alicia, the one he had once seen as the weakest, but now had become the strongest person he had ever known. With this heavy yet determined mindset, Jake quietly left the hallway. No one knew exactly what he was thinking, but everyone understood that today's event would be a profound lesson, not just for Jake, but for everyone who had witnessed it. It was a lesson about respect, humility, and the true value of strength, things that could not be measured by physical strength or domination, but only by the heart and sincerity of each person. And in the fading silence of the hallway, everyone present understood one important truth. Silence was never a sign of weakness, and the strongest person was not the one who always won through violence or oppression, but the one who knew when to speak, when to remain silent, and when to stand up and defend their self-respect and dignity. This was the profound lesson that Alicia had silently taught everyone today, a lesson that none of them would ever easily forget. From that day onward, every step Jake took down the school hallway carried with it a completely new and bitter feeling. The deep realization of being judged, underestimated, and looked down upon by those who had once been his allies and friends. The event that day was not just a personal clash between two individuals, but a significant turning point, a profound milestone in his life, a turning point that forced him to reflect on himself and everything he had done. Jake realized that what he was experiencing now was the direct consequence of the prejudices he had once held against Alicia and many others in the past. He had always thought that he had the right to look down on people based on their appearance, personality, or even race. But now, when faced with similar prejudice and disregard, he understood just how bitter and painful it was to be underestimated. Every day, Jake had to endure the cold stares and whispered gossip behind his back. The people who had always surrounded him, who had praised every action and word of his, were now the first ones to turn their backs on him. The snide remarks and taunts he heard every day mirrored exactly what he had once said to Alicia and others. Jake fully understood the cruel irony of the situation. He was now paying the price for his own past actions and flawed thinking. But amid all the pain and regret, what troubled Jake the most was the memory of Alicia's calm and unshakable demeanor that day. Alicia, the girl he had relentlessly mocked and tried to hurt, had taught him the most profound lesson of his life. Not through violence, but through restraint and a strength of character that was nothing short of admirable. Alicia had only used martial arts when she had no other choice, when her silence and patience had been pushed to their ultimate limit by him. Jake wondered if Alicia had ever felt the way he did now. Had she ever felt the pain, the shame, and the deep hurt every time he and others looked down on her? And then he realized one thing, that she must have silently endured all of that for a long time. That thought made him feel even more shameful and worthless. Every time he happened to cross paths with Alicia, Jake felt smaller than ever. He couldn't look her in the eyes, nor could he bring himself to speak, not even to offer a simple apology. Alicia, on the other hand, showed no hatred or coldness toward him. She simply walked past him as if nothing had ever happened, maintaining just enough distance to make him understand that she didn't need to prove anything anymore. Her demeanor made Jake feel even more bitter and regretful than any words or actions could. The friends who once revered Jake as the school's symbol of power now turned their backs on him entirely. Every time he walked into a classroom or the schoolyard, no one greeted him as they once had. No one wanted to stand by him anymore when they realized that the power he once held was built on bullying and threatening others. Jake began to feel the isolation growing more severe, but he couldn't blame anyone but himself, because it was he who had sowed the prejudices and made the wrong choices. In the afternoons after school, Jake would often sit alone on a bench in the corner of the schoolyard, watching his old friends laughing and playing in the distance. Those moments of loneliness and bitterness made him think a lot. He thought about Alicia, about her strength, resilience, and the dignity she always showed. And he realized clearly that the girl he had once looked down upon because of her skin color, because of her quiet demeanor, was the one with the most admirable qualities he had ever known. Jake recalled the last words Alicia had said to him that day. No one has the right to hurt others just because they think they are stronger. Those words echoed in his mind, serving as a constant reminder of the grave mistake he had made. He now understood that the cost of his prejudices and misguided thinking had been very high, and he was paying that price with his self-respect, his honor, and the respect of those around him. But deep inside, Jake also began to realize that Despite the pain, this might be the most valuable lesson of his life. A lesson in forgiveness, humility, and most importantly, the true value of respect. He understood that in order to regain respect from others, he first had to learn to respect others, especially those he had once looked down on. Jake promised himself that he would never again make the same mistake. He was determined to never underestimate anyone based on their appearance, skin color, or how they presented themselves. He realized that true strength didn't lie in overpowering others, but in understanding, respecting, and showing humility toward the people around him. The price Jake had to pay for his prejudices was high, but he knew it was a price worth paying. A price he had to pay in order to grow, to learn how to become a better person. And most importantly, it was a price he needed to pay to understand the profound lesson Alicia had silently and powerfully taught him. Never underestimate someone just because of their silence or appearance. And so, after all the events, the pain, and the bitter lessons Jake had to endure, the story gradually drew to a close, leaving a deep resonance in the hearts of everyone, an echo of the true strength that comes from within each person. Jake realized that he had learned an invaluable lesson that would likely stay with him for the rest of his life. Silence is not a sign of weakness. Sometimes it is the greatest strength. In the days following that event, Jake no longer tried to avoid Alicia's gaze. Instead, he began to seek out opportunities to face her, not to challenge or retaliate, but to seek genuine forgiveness. This was not easy for him, a person who had once been proud, arrogant, and always trying to prove his superiority. But now he understood that it was necessary, because he knew he could not continue living with the burden of regret and guilt. One afternoon, when the schoolyard had emptied of students, Jake finally found Alicia sitting alone beneath a large tree, just where she often quietly sat reading after every class. He walked toward her slowly, hesitantly, his heart full of unease and insecurity. But Alicia merely looked up at him gently, her gaze calm and soothing enough to give Jake a bit of reassurance. "Alicia, I want to talk for a moment," Jake began, his voice no longer carrying the arrogance of the past, but instead filled with genuine concern and apprehension. "I'm listening, Jake," Alicia replied softly, placing her book down and looking directly at him with a focused expression, yet with no trace of accusation or resentment. Jake took a deep breath, trying to find the right words, but then he realized that no apology could truly undo the harm he had caused Alicia. However, he knew he had to at least try. "I want to apologize for everything I've done. I really don't understand how I became someone like that, a person who imposes, looks down on others for reasons as meaningless as their appearance, personality, or skin color," Jake said sincerely, his voice trembling with emotion and regret. Alicia silently watched him, her gaze softening slightly, but still maintaining her calm demeanor. "Jake, I forgave you a long time ago," she said gently, causing Jake to freeze in surprise. "I don't need you to apologize anymore. I just hope that you've truly learned something from what happened. I hope you understand that true strength doesn't lie in hurting others, but in protecting and respecting them." Her words rang out like a great release in Jake's heart. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude and sincerity. "I understand now, Alicia. I truly thank you." Alicia smiled softly in return, a smile Jake had never seen before, a completely sincere smile, with no trace of blame or resentment. She stood up, lightly patting Jake's shoulder in a kind and friendly gesture before walking away, leaving Jake standing there alone, for the first time in his life feeling the true meaning of forgiveness, mercy, and the real strength that comes from the heart. In the days that followed, Jake began to change noticeably. He no longer sought to impose his power over others. Instead, he learned to respect people, to listen, and to understand the emotions of those around him. Gradually, the friends who had once distanced themselves began to notice the positive change. Some started to come back to his side, not because of the fear or power he once had, but because they saw in Jake a genuine transformation, an effort to become a better person. The story of Jake and Alicia gradually became a valuable lesson passed around the school, a profound lesson about true strength, forgiveness, and respect. Alicia never had to use violence to prove her strength because she understood that the greatest strength lies in self-control, patience, and the mercy she extends to others. The story closed, but the deep message remained in the hearts of everyone. Silence is not a sign of weakness. Sometimes it is the greatest strength. And now a profound question is posed to all who have followed this story. What would you do if you were Jake? Do you have the courage to admit your mistakes and change yourself like he did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story truly meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring and meaningful stories. Finally, remember that each of us has true strength within ourselves, strength in patience, mercy, and the ability to face ourselves. It's up to you how that strength will manifest in your own life.